Long before swords clashed or walls fell, another battle was already raging inside the mind. Imagine ancient plains under a dim, foreboding light. It's here we find the oldest weapon humanity ever mastered. Psychological warfare. Fear travels faster than armies, and doubt can crumble a fortress before the first arrow is even loosed. Ancient legends are filled with stories of victories won without a single fight, of entire cities surrendering to nothing more than rumors, dark omens, and carefully staged terror. It's a stark reminder that controlling perception often mattered more than controlling territory. The great commanders of old understood something we still struggle with today. Belief decides the outcome long before violence ever confirms it. Lost civilizations left behind subtle clues to this invisible warfare. Archaeologists now uncover fortifications designed not just to defend, but to intimidate. Think of massive walls built far taller than necessary, gates carved with terrifying figures, and city layouts meant to overwhelm and confuse visitors. Ancient maps weren't just for navigation. They exaggerated borders and distances, projecting an image of power far beyond actual reach. Forbidden texts describe rituals performed just within earshot of the enemy, sacrifices staged to suggest divine favor, and banners designed to unsettle rather than inspire. This wasn't random fear. It was cultivated, engineered through spectacle, sound, and symbolism to erode an enemy's will to resist. Legends often amplify these tactics, telling of armies frozen in place by an unexpected eclipse, which was quickly interpreted as a sign of divine judgment. Leaders would weaponize prophecy, manipulating both their enemies and their own troops. Archaeology supports this, revealing shrines strategically placed along invasion routes and ceremonial sites aligned with celestial events. Climate and astronomy became psychological tools. A sudden storm, a drought, or a heat wave was framed as a sign of favor or doom, allowing a commander to claim control over nature itself. This transformed the uncertainty of the environment into a weapon that could shatter morale. Ultimately, political power depended on controlling these narratives. For psychological warfare to work, people had to believe. Secret records reveal how dissenting opinions were brutally silenced. Priests were punished for contradicting official omens, and messengers executed for delivering unfavorable news. This ensured that the only fear that spread was the fear sanctioned by authority. Even victories were carefully curated, with enemy losses, exaggerated, and setbacks completely erased from the record. Today, modern technology helps us decode these ancient tactics. Spatial analysis and reconstructed soundscapes show how chants, drums, and horns were used to distort perception and make a small force sound like an unstoppable horde. So, as we journey into this hidden history, we focus not on the violence, but on the chilling silence of anticipation before the conflict. To understand psychological warfare is to understand how ancient societies learned to win without fighting. The manipulation of fear, belief, and uncertainty was every bit as decisive as sharpened steel. These invisible weapons shaped empires, collapsed civilizations, and left behind scars we are only now beginning to uncover. How did ancient empires control millions with just a handful of soldiers? The answer wasn't just force. It was fear, weaponized and systemized. As empires expanded, they needed a way to project power across vast distances. So, they created a language of terror that was portable, repeatable, and so archaeologists are uncovering the evidence. In conquered cities, they find standardized symbols, identical statues, and inscriptions all designed with a single purpose: to constantly remind the locals of a distant, ever-watchful authority. Ancient maps weren't just for navigation. They were displayed in public, massive and intimidating, to make the empire's reach feel absolute and inevitable. Forbidden texts describe how stories of brutal punishment were deliberately exaggerated, traveling faster than any army to crush the very thought of rebellion. The goal was simple: make obedience a habit, maintained by the chilling expectation of what asterisk. Could asterisk happen, even when no soldiers were in sight? But this strategy had a hidden cost. Fear can suppress resistance, but it also corrodes the trust that holds a society together. In regions where belief in authority began to crack, we see a domino effect of collapse. Cities built walls against imagined threats, not real ones. Thriving trade networks withered away as suspicion replaced cooperation. Rulers even turned natural disasters into psychological weapons. When droughts, floods, or plagues struck, they framed the hardship as divine punishment for disloyalty. Ancient legends show how people internalized this blame, turning their anger inward on themselves instead of upward at their leaders. It was a brutally effective way for a regime to survive a crisis it couldn't solve. These leaders also became masters of misinformation. They spread false reports of their own overwhelming numbers, of divine alliances, and of invincible secret weapons. Archaeology has even uncovered military camps built far larger than necessary, and evidence of countless fires lit at night, to create the illusion of an unstoppable army. Imagine the sound horns and drums echoing through valleys, engineered to create the terrifying sensation of being completely surrounded. Panic, it turns out, was often a more effective weapon than the sword. So why don't we hear about this in our history books? Because admitting you won through deception undermines the heroic narrative. Chronicles praise courage and strength while conveniently omitting the manipulation. Victory was framed as a matter of honor, not a calculated exploitation of human fear. But as we dig deeper, a darker picture emerges. These weren't just battlefield tricks. They were systems of governance. The question we have to ask is, did these methods ever really disappear? Or did they just evolve, hiding in plain sight within our own modern world? Psychological warfare's most enduring victory was never about land. It was about the mind. It taught power, that controlling what people believe is far more efficient than controlling where they live. Archaeology proves this. Long after empires crumbled, their symbols, their myths, and their fears persisted, picked up and reused by the next rulers who inherited intimidation as a tradition. Ancient maps continued to show exaggerated borders long after the armies that drew them were gone, preserving an illusion of power. Forbidden texts, whispers from the past, tell of leaders who knew that once you plant fear in someone's mind, you don't need to be physically present to control them. Entire regimes could rule through memory and self-surveillance without constant force. But lost civilizations also show us the limits of this weapon. Fear, it turns out, is corrosive. It eventually eats away at the very social bonds it's meant to control. Archaeologists have found evidence of sudden cultural collapses where belief simply fractured too quickly. People abandoned their rituals, their symbols, and their centers of authority. Often, this was accelerated by environmental stress. When droughts or floods proved that rulers couldn't actually command nature, the illusion of their divine protection shattered. Psychological dominance cracked, and fear curdled into resentment. The legends of terror transformed into cautionary tales, warning future societies about building power on manipulation instead of trust. Today, technology lets us see these turning points with incredible clarity. We can align climate data with settlement abandonment and shifts in art and tools, pinpointing the exact moment psychological control failed. Yet, it's a lesson we seem reluctant to learn. Acknowledging the fragility of power built on perception is unsettling, especially for modern systems that rely on very similar dynamics. So, we often reduce ancient psychological warfare to a historical curiosity, softening its relevance, denying its continuity, even as the evidence shows how quickly a fear-based order collapses once belief is collectively withdrawn. What we find is an uncomfortable truth. The tools of ancient psychological warfare never vanished. They evolve. They shifted from grand rituals and public spectacles into the subtleties of language, symbolism, and information control. Archaeology reminds us that these methods leave physical traces, altered cities, redirected trade routes, erased identities. The core principle, echoed in forbidden texts, remains the same. Shaping perception is more important than shaping reality. Victory is achieved when people, driven by fear or confusion, act against their own interests. The most powerful battles are still fought without a single drop of blood. Ancient psychological warfare didn't end, it was perfected. As we navigate our own era of uncertainty, climate stress, and information overload, the past whispers a warning. When fear replaces understanding and belief replaces truth, the battlefield is everywhere. The enemy is no longer visible. And the real question becomes, do we even recognize the weapon when it is being used against us? Or have we already surrendered long before we realized the war had even begun? Thanks for watching.